Yeah. All right.
I like how you think, Joe.
Oh my. Okay. We are going to start here with TechChat Tuesday for Tuesday, January 19th, 2021. I'm Ken Rimple, and I brought with me Sujan Kapadia and Joe Berger.
Hey, guys.
Hello.
All right. So this week we have Joe as our special guest. We're going to talk about mobile app development with Flutter and compare it to Android a little bit in terms of native development. Before we get started with that, I just want to go through some announcements. Becca has given me share screen rights, so I'm gonna take over. I'm in charge here.
Can I have your title, Joe? Master of the Universe? That's awesome.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
All right. Okay, so let's get started. So this week, we're in the beginning of 2021, back for a longer break, and glad to be back. The couple things just to point out. First of all, you can always hit our website to find out interesting things we're talking about and doing. So if you go to Chariot Solutions /blog, you'll find a bunch of articles in here. One of them that just dropped is getting started with Lambda container images from Keith Gregory. He talks about the fact that now you can use a Docker container to launch your Lambdas. So that means all your dependencies are built in the Docker image. Now, the thing about this is it's not super fast. So you don't use these, for instant start kind of Lambdas, I guess, unless maybe you can somehow warm them up. But you can certainly use them for something like, a batch process that has to kick off a Lambda. So he explains the whole build process. You can go ahead and just build with the Lambda API, and you're bundling the Lambda inside of a Docker container, which also, to me, tells me you can run it locally and debug it locally by just running Docker images locally, which is kind of interesting. So that's yet another thing we were looking at as we were getting started, looking at Lambda development more seriously for applications. They announced at the end of December that they were doing this. So it's a reality now. There were third-party images before. Now there's these Lambda container images. So that's a blog post by Keith Gregory.
It's a really nice blog post with very clear steps.
Yes. Yeah, he spends a lot of time. He's very detail-oriented. Some other articles, Tracy Wilson-Rossman has one on digital transformation. We have Joe has done two, which we're going to talk about when we interview him here, on background processing in Android and React Native versus Flutter versus Native. And so those are blog posts. We always keep posting there. You can find our content for the podcast if you just Googled and ran into this under the podcast tab, and all of our podcasts are there available for subscription with iTunes or RSS feeds. And we're in all the different podcast stores, including Spotify and Amazon, as well as Google. I guess the Google store just retired the podcast store, if I remember correctly, but definitely on iTunes as well. Also, if you head over to Philly Emerging Tech, I want to announce that we are live with the registrations and have been for a couple weeks for Emerging Technologies for the Enterprise 2021. Mm-hmm. That is our conference that we run every year. So it's happening virtually this year one more time, May 4th to 6th. It's over 3 days instead of 2. We kind of break it up so it's not 8 full hours of content to make people completely stuck at their desks. But that'll be May 4th to 6th. We have an incredible early bird of $70. And so jump on that right now. There's an amazing set of people. I'm going to use the word amazing 10 times. But our keynote speaker, one of our keynotes, is Alan Kay, the father of object-oriented programming and graphical user interfaces. I know we're not worthy, right? Yeah. We reached out to him because the team said, how can we pick an amazing speaker for 2021 as a keynote? And Alan's name came up. And internally, my mind's like, yeah, no, he's not going to say yes to us. And it turns out he did. He liked what our conference is about. He's very oriented towards innovative people, and he wants to help people. So he's glad to join, glad to be online. So he's going to be one of our featured speakers for 2021. Also, we have Brian Getz, the Java language architect at Oracle, David Nolan, who's the ClojureScript lead developer and really interesting in the functional programming space, and a bunch of other people as well. So head over to phillyemergingtech.com. It'll direct you to the 2021 site, and you can see it. If you want to see the prior year, you can just hit 2020.phillyemergingtech.com, and you can see all the people that we had there. You can then also go over to YouTube, and that's at youtube.com, Chariot Solutions, and you'll see playlists for each of our years of Philly Emerging Tech and other shows that we've done. So if you go to playlists, there they are. And I had us put together a super playlist of Philly ETE for all the videos we have that Becca was kind enough to do for us. So if you just want to kind of put that on and watch stuff all the way back to 2015, 2014, 2013, you can do that. And we've had some amazing speakers there. I said amazing at least 4 times, now 5. All right, so that's that. Why don't we get started, and we'll hold off on the interview topics. We'll just get through a little bit of dev news first. So let me have Sujan go up with the Raspberry Pi Lego sorter. This thing looks cool.
So this thing is amazing, and I definitely could have used it as a father of an 8-year-old daughter. This is a combination of Raspberry Pi and obviously open source software, a camera, and a set of servos and custom-made bins to sort Lego pieces into the right bin. So you drop a Lego piece in, and then it figures out based off the shape, size, color, etc., which bin it should go in. All of the work in building this is detailed in the blog post and the attached source code and GitHub projects, etc. It uses machine learning, of course, right? Because everything has to use machine learning these days. To sort the Legos, it uses what's called a convolutional neural network, which has been a popular style of neural networks for image recognition, video recognition, that has like a huge amount of accuracy. So anyway, they've trained this on actual 3D models of Lego pieces. So apparently there's no Lego piece that this thing cannot recognize and sort. So I just think it's amazing that all of this is built by hand and open source software and commodity hardware.
So if you dropped your Lego Death Star and it shattered into a million pieces, at least you could put it away in order.
There you go.
That thing is wicked cool. Very cool. All right. Here's a couple for you. I wanted to bring up the fact that Jordan Walk, the creator of React, has left Facebook to start a new company. So there's a Twitter post from him somewhere in here. Let's see here. Nope. I don't know what his actual Twitter handle is, but so let's just say he's moved on. Not that it has anything to do with it. AWS is creating a new open source design system with React. And so this is going to be interesting. AWS UI, which they call and this is from the Register, Tim Anderson's article. So they say that this is the first step in a larger process of creating a new open source design system, according to them. And so apparently it's, let's see, context for this is the open source and user interface code for .NET porting assistant. And looks like they're trying to move away from Windows as well, trying to move to Linux for some of these design systems. So it'll be interesting to see where this heads to. There's AWS UI / components - React. So let's hit that on GitHub. AWS. Of course, I didn't actually look at the screen. Well, anyway. Components React. And there's probably an ad there. Anyway, should have had my links planned. Never mind.
Let me just Google it.
Yeah, that would make sense, wouldn't it? Here we go. Thank you. I always go to the wrong one. Anyway, point being that this is something to take a look at. I know, there have been other, where's the darn project link? Someone help me. Here we go.
Oh, the last paragraph is interesting. It's saying this allows Amazon teams to release open source software products that are based off of this. So I guess also encouraging internally teams at Amazon that are using this and that want to open source software. This is one path to that. That's pretty neat.
Yeah, so that'd be very cool to look at. So I'm not going to bother watching everyone see me Google in a very poor way. They used to have a link to the projects on the right here, and I can't find it. And it's probably me being, screen blind. Anyway, so that's an interesting thing to look forward to.
I wonder if this is in React to like Google doing a lot with Flutter and other stuff.
Could be. And there's Storybook, for example. So these are components for React, but I guess it's like a design language. I guess this would be like, Material or something like that, right? Interesting. Okay. That XOR trick.
Oh, yes. So this guy, Florian Hartman, I think is his name. He's a researcher at Google, used to be associated with Mozilla. There's a bunch of interesting blog posts about like probability and stats and as it pertains to programming. This one's a cool thing. If you don't know XOR, if you're a programmer back in the old days, you definitely know what exclusive OR is and bitwise operations. So I won't get into all the details of that, but basically this is a blog post that goes over some neat tricks you can use with an XOR operator, like finding duplicate values, swapping values. It's actually a pretty nifty operator that can be used in a lot of things to simplify operations. So anyway, I think it's worth checking out. There's some neat tricks in there. Sometimes people in programming interviews ask questions around it. Back in the days when I did more kind of hobby graphics programming and lower level stuff, XOR was something that I used very often. Anyway, I highly recommend checking this guy's blog out in general. There's some really cool stuff in there, and he demystifies some interesting things.
Yeah, wasn't it used for things like collision detection between two objects and pixel points?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's also used a lot in cryptography.
Yep.
Mm-hmm. Looks like a great one. Okay. Let's see here. We have, I'll put a humorous one up just because it's good to laugh now and then. So this guy here, the worst pieces of code I've ever seen, is an entertaining little blog post. And I thought, I've written bad code before. We all have. So let's kind of chuckle along with him. So as jesuisundev.com, and he says, today I'm going to show you the worst pieces of code I've ever seen. Some devilries that should never have been produced. So this kind of thing you run into all the time where people do things. He's like, I sprint to my station at first. So he was fixing, what was he fixing? Something in, let's see.
In one of the libraries.
Yeah, some library. But anyway, so he was looking at some code and he found something like this. So he's mixing the person who wrote this is mixing all sorts of things. So for example, there's like a capitalized function name that they're awaiting on. There's like, all right, return T, but then we return null if there's an error, but then we catch instead of just doing an error. And then like our variables are different types and there's async in two places and it's just a mess. And then we're doing a then on the async, which we don't need to do. So this is one of those things where if you see code like this, you got to clean it up, right? It's just like, who knows what happens when it doesn't work, right? His comment, of course, is to put a meme up there. So is it really? What's that?
The guy reminds me of the angry chef Gordon Ramsay. I don't know why.
Yeah. Is there really an I variable? Where are we now? That's an ID, right? Integer, UID. And what exactly is expire? Why is there camel case, Pascal case, and snake case? So it's just funny. You can read through this. There's one about broken promises where something wasn't properly handling a function that was a promise call. Here's one. Let's see. So let's see. We have an async function get ticket. We await valid ticket expiration. And then we apparently, so when that's done, we don't look for a return value. I guess it might throw an error. Who knows? We're not checking for the error, so we can't deal with the error and send it back. Then we do an await on ticket UUID. But the bottom line is, he had to rewrite that completely. So a couple things. When you use async await in JavaScript, make sure you put try catches in your code if you're going to await something, because await by default, all it's going to do is it's going to continue on. And then if it'll wait and then come back and give you the answer. So for example, line 5 is a little more typical. But if it throws an exception, you're not looking for that. So if you were going to return something back or you wanted to change it or log the error, you don't have a chance. You have to put a try catch around the call to await, or you're never going to capture that.
The 1980s song Promises by Naked Eyes, if you read the lyrics again, it actually makes a lot of sense.
That's funny. And then I like the one Spaghetti Bolognese. And he does like a Star Wars kind of thing for this. So this reminds me of an ETE talk by Uncle Bob Martin. So we just start scrolling.
Oh, this one was about the library that they were using.
Uh-huh.
He's only pasting a snippet of a code. He's saying that the actual file was
Thousands of lines.
Remember you scrolled through the whole thing in the beginning of the presentation?
Yeah, remember that?
Yeah.
Did you remember that? So Uncle Bob Martin at ETE, I'm guessing 2013, 2014, he just put, I guess, his wallet on the down key and started scrolling a piece of Java code, and it just kept going and going. And he played Ligeti's opera that they play in 2001: A Space Odyssey. And it perfectly worked with it. Oh God. So I've seen code so bad that you just have to look at it and say, we're rewriting this thing from scratch because we can't trust the code. This would definitely be it. I mean, there's all sorts of stuff being mixed in here. I mean, you see it all the time. People just, instead of sitting down and breaking things down to their smallest parts and making sure each of the parts work, functionally divide the code up, figure out how to test it. People just sometimes just slam code in there, and then they spend all their time trying to test maybe the happy path. What about all the failing paths here? It's crazy. So anyway, maybe it's him. I think this might be him.
Ramsey.
Oh God, it is Gordon Ramsay. That's what it is, because it looks like a cuisine thing. Yep.
Oh,
I didn't even.
Okay.
Yeah, I didn't even try to touch this demon child. Oh God. Anyway, so that's a fun thing to watch. I'm sure everyone's run into something like this where they've maintained a piece of code that someone else wrote, and maybe it went through 10 or 15 different people before it hit you. I always find the resistance when you find something that messy. You have to figure out what you need to do to just keep it running for now, and then put on your schedule to refactor it and replace it, if you can. But it's really hard sometimes to convince management when something is that brittle to do something about it. What kind of techniques do you use in that case?
I can speak of myself. I always try to match the coding style of the client that I'm working for. Having said that, I do strive for simplicity, as simple as possible, as broken up into little functional pieces as possible.
Yep.
So dealing with listen, I've seen applications, like complicated applications, that were written in one single source file. One file. And but it's not always the case. And as this guy describes later on, he found that it was easier to rewrite the entire library.
Yeah.
To actually find the mistake there. Just because there was such a spaghetti, he couldn't figure out what was going on and where.
Yeah, and if you start with test, if you can, and you have the time to do it, and you figure out all the conditions, you can start by building something solid to start with. There's a really good book that's old though. It's called Clean Code. That's another one that's kind of like discussing, how to like clean up your software, and it's very test heavy. Kind of like, one of the things someone said once years ago was, looking at code like this and trying to debug it without test is like putting a screwdriver in an electrical socket and hoping you don't get shocked. Yeah. You need to be able to express what you're trying to achieve in something like a test, because otherwise you have nothing. You can keep repeatedly testing as you change the code, and potentially one of your changes might break everything. You have to go back and find out what you needed to fix it.
Yeah. There was a push a few years ago for test-driven development.
Yeah.
And I don't know where it ended up, but it sounded like a solution to all the problems, and it died. And then there was a push for aspect-oriented programming.
Yeah.
That also didn't take off. So I'm not sure if there is a single solution for.
In my experience, three things that have worked best, teams I've been on, is one, pair programming and test-driven development. So I've been on teams where we kind of do extreme programming. Forget about the agile, Scrum, safe, all the ceremony, all the process that's been added on top of pure agile these days. But just pair programming and test-driven, that has been huge in disseminating good practices without pointing fingers, without making people feel uncomfortable. Two, automated tools, which are admittedly hard on existing code bases, because you can't like stop coding for a month and say, go fix all the warnings and everything until you have a clean code base. But they can catch hairy pieces of code like what you're showing, Ken, with like cyclomatic complexity and things
Exactly.
like that. At least hit low hanging fruit or hot spots. And then counterintuitively, instead of pointing out people's bad code, is like once a month, a team I was on, we would do lunch and learns where we would highlight a good piece of code.
Oh, that's great.
Talk about it and be like, oh, look, this is a really nice example of clean code. And it was kind of the, I guess, subversive or reverse psychology way of showing others, like, here's what you could aspire to write your code like, instead of pointing out bad stuff.
Those are all really good points. Yeah, and whenever I've sat down and forced myself for something, testing things that are novel, I think is important, right? Things that are weird and novel and unconventional. It verifies your assumptions, but checking every little setter and getter is nuts. Like going for 100% code coverage is insane. But testing the novel stuff, testing the stuff that very is likely to break because it's more complex, will also send you down a road for those things of refactoring them and breaking them up into smaller functions. There's no magic bullet. I agree. Some other apps, we do functional, we do user interface testing sometimes when the app, like you're actually hitting the different pieces of the app itself under runtime, and then you're testing a wider swath at a time. Sometimes they find like usability bugs and like, this feature should do these 3 steps and work. And it's easier to write that in more of a functional test and a running test against the app than it is to write a lot of little unit tests sometimes. So some teams more lean on those. They just take more time to write, and they take a lot more time to run, which is the downside. So if you can invest some time up front and write some good tests for things that are at least moderately complex, it's going to pay off for you.
Yeah. I think the other, one other point worth mentioning with like the automated checks is, imagine like the function you're showing right now on the screen, right? It may have been very innocuous initially and started with like 3 lines, right?
Yes.
And over time, multiple developers are touching it, modifying it, and it becomes over time now this massive spaghetti code. That's where some of the automated checks can try to help make that more painful, so you can't get to that point.
Right. Yeah, and I chuckle when you said try to match the customer, because I look at this, and this is the customer, I'd be like, we got to talk. Let me take you out to lunch and let's not even talk code. Let's just chat for a while, and then we'll start talking about this. But yeah, sometimes we run into stuff like this. I remember many, many years ago, I ran into something where someone was using an applet, this is that long ago, to connect to Oracle on an open port over the internet. Yeah, they were using TDS, and they didn't know that they were doing the wrong thing because they kind of waded into doing Java development at the time. And I had to explain, I had to like lay it out for them, saying, look, if someone else can connect to this port, they can connect in. And I hope you don't have like, the default passwords for your Oracle connections. And so, I had to teach them like RPC programming at the time and how to like lock things down and set up credentials and a firewall and all that. So, you do it in a way where you try to give them the information gently and explain what the downside is of not doing something about it, and let them make their decision, So yeah, always fun. All right. But enough of this stuff. Well, we have one more thing. Let me see here. There was something about a CNC router. Anatomy of a CNC router. Let's do that one. How's that?
So this is a super, 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 super long blog post. One of the longest blog posts I've seen in a while. So I only skimmed through it.
Holy moly.
The main wow factor to me is you can build your own CNC router. It just,
wow.
If I ever get to retire early in life, this is a project I would like to take on, because you can build your own CNC router and then you can use that to build a lot of stuff. So the fact that someone did all this, put it all out there in a blog post,
wow,
and you could probably follow along, and I'm sure there's YouTube videos or things of how they built it. To me, it's mind blowing.
A CNC router is great. Side note, side story. My family, we had someone in our family who used to restore old model cars like Bentleys and things like that. And they made their own machines to make machines. This feels kind of like that. Like you could potentially use it to make dies and things like that to create things. And I just think about if that person was alive today, what they could do with all this technology we have today if they were a little bit technical.
Like people, like Philadelphia has NextFab and these communities, and people have been talking about like kind of the decline of libraries and things like that in communities. And I think there's so many potential uses for space in communities that are not being used any longer for housing physical books and things like that. Like you could have your own little maker communities in each of your libraries. I mean, there's a lot of potential with commodity hardware like this.
I mean, he's talking about every little piece, like the actuators and the motors and, you know, all sorts of encoders and wow.
Yeah.
That's amazing. That's amazing. All right. But we have Joe Berger here. Mr. Berger. Howdy. So let's talk now. We'll get the screen out of the way for a second. Let's talk now about Flutter. So you ran into Flutter's as a you know, a mobile application development technology. Why don't you at a high level talk to us about, so first of all, you are an Android developer is one of the things you do. How did you run into Flutter?
I have no idea. It was there, and I
That's
decided
fair.
to learn it.
Mhm.
Well, it was by Sujan's suggestion. He's like, hey, why don't you take a look at Flutter? You like this stuff. I'm like, yeah, sure. I like this stuff. So if you want to bring up that article, because there is a bunch of good stuff there, and we can go through it.
This is the React Native versus Flutter versus Native. All right, here we go.
This is just a decision guide for, because most of the time when companies are faced with a decision which technology to use, it's not necessarily always done from the right perspective. It's usually either they have already existing programmers, or they lean towards something just because they have a background there. So this guy will help them figure out what's right for them, and it always depends on customers' needs.
Of course.
In this guide, I go through 7 aspects of mobile technology stack. I go through technology behind each. I go through popularity, because believe it or not, popularity is one of the major drives behind selecting a technology. If the technology is not popular, you don't want it because it's not going to be supported. And then we go through development environments for each, ease of use, productivity, performance, and scalability. So hopefully this will help decision makers figure out which is the best choice for them. What surprised me the most is that although React Native is currently the most popular, and it has not lost popularity in the last 2 years, Flutter has been the only technology that's been gaining popularity. And Facebook themselves abandoned React Native for their chat application, just because of the performance characteristics. So okay. I go through those. I explain what's going on behind the scenes for each, and then we discuss what's best for clients, taking into consideration their needs. So hopefully it's useful. If people do find it useful, and if there are any questions about this, we can go into detail on certain aspects of this article.
So let me ask you a couple questions, kind of like, you know, get people oriented a little bit more. So, you know, obviously there's native development, which is, you know, going to use, Java or Kotlin, for example, and you're compiling down and running on their virtual machine on Android, for example. We'll take Android as our sample here. And then, as we had just mentioned, React Native, which is kind of like the dominant one at the moment, at 42% of interest here, but a lot of companies doing it. It's taking the React APIs, and the components you build are translated into native components on the browser through a cross-compilation process. If I remember correctly.
Not exactly like that.
Okay.
Browser is not involved.
I meant I'm sorry, browser is the wrong term, on the actual mobile device. So it's an app, right?
Right. It's an app, and React Native Core is the one that's running on the device.
Got it. Okay.
And it's a JavaScript bridge that bridges your code into the native components, but not exactly. and that's why there is a lag. It's a little bit slower than Flutter, and of course it's slower than native, just because of this JavaScript bridge. But also you're faced with a problem of, if the native components are upgraded, then you have to wait for React to upgrade their core and their JavaScript bridge in order for your JavaScript to be recognized, in order for you to be able to make the changes. That's one problem. Second problem is React Native is a very bare bone compared to Flutter. Flutter is a lot richer environment and widgets and functionality. React Native is not as rich. So you end up using a lot of third-party frameworks or libraries. And some of those libraries are created and maintained by one or two people. And if those people decide not to maintain them, then you're stuck. And usually what the case is, when React Native is upgraded, some of your libraries will fail. And that becomes a major problem, because now you either have to fork that library and upgrade it yourself, or you have to wait for the developers to upgrade it. So yeah, there are some issues with that.
So React Native then seems to suffer kind of in a larger level some of the issues of plain old React projects, which if you start a React project, the React API is small.
Yeah.
And you have to go out and get a state machine, a router, a networking API. If you're dealing with various features, you'll find APIs for those. And you're saying that Flutter is more batteries included, where you can start and do a lot with it. So what kind of things come? So you mentioned a component library. What are the major core APIs that come with Flutter that you can use out of the box?
Well, in Flutter, you can basically create a very UI heavy application without any performance hits. A lot of everything in Flutter is a widget, so you can create a lot of widgets using their built-in material framework plugins. A lot of the actual UI elements already built in. For example, accordion element is not a part of React, so you have to find your own, or create your own, or find a library. Flutter provides you with a lot more widgets to work with.
And so let's talk the technology then. So how is Flutter built? Like what's the output? You mentioned that, like, for React Native, there's a React Native core and the JavaScript bridge, and then you run your components in JavaScript through the bridge. What is a Flutter application comprised of when it's built down?
Flutter uses Dart framework, and that Dart framework is its own scripting language, and it gives you a lot of available widgets, animations, gestures, and the material components. Dart framework itself sits on the top of C++ engine, which manages Dart virtual machine, which in turn is aware of frame scheduling, which is a huge problem with React, because everything in React runs in a JavaScript thread.
Right.
In Flutter, the virtual machine is scheduling frames, system events, and asset resolution. So you're not blocking the frame rendering at all.
Oh, that's great.
And since nothing blocks a UI frame rendering, Flutter is driven by the Flutter engine frame rendering. So there is an engine that's built into Flutter that drives everything. So from the developer's perspective, everything in Flutter is a widget. Widgets are bound to native components by Flutter engine, just like React Native does through the JavaScript bridge. There is no such bridge in Flutter. It just maps your components directly to the native elements by this Flutter engine. And since there is no JavaScript thread, Flutter runs a little faster, and it's a little easier to debug, because some of the errors in a React Native app come from the depths of the JavaScript bridge. And when they bubble up, it's almost impossible to tell where they're coming from. And yeah, it becomes a debugging hell.
So is there a Dart framework built into Android now? Is that the idea? Is like the Dart language embedded there? You mentioned a virtual machine. I'm assuming
it's not embedded in Android itself. It packages everything in APK, but the on a huge positive side is that you can actually develop in Dart using Android Studio. There is an option to either create using Kotlin, Java, or Dart. So you create a Dart project, and working in Android Studio is such a bliss. You can't even compare it. I'm writing watch face for Garmin watch right now, and I'm getting ready to post the article about it. And they use Eclipse plugin, which is a nightmare. It's like a step in the past.
Yes,
like
yes.
10, 15 years in the past. So yeah, working in Android Studio is very, very productive.
So then when you're working in Android Studio, are you then working and passing it on to a Android VM, or can you actually run this natively on your OS 10 or Linux desktop?
You run it natively on the device.
Oh, that's really nice and quick then. Okay.
Yep. Yeah, both of them, both Flutter and React Native provide hot reloading. So you change something in your code, you press a button and it reloads automatically.
Right.
So in that sense, they both are very, very similar. It's the amount of work that goes on behind the scenes that's different.
Right. How it's generated, how it's built.
Yeah.
Do you have the same kind of things that you did with like a Cordova or something like that, where you've got platform-specific code like hook points? Yeah.
So React Native is going to be very heavy on platform-specific code.
Right.
A lot more heavier than Flutter, just because Flutter provides a lot more out of the box. But for the simple application, you don't need to do any platform-specific code. It's those specialized applications that become heavy in native code, and that's another point that I'm talking about in this article. If your application is going to be heavy in platform-specific code, you might as well just write a native application. Just using Android and iOS developers, and it's going to be simpler and easier and faster.
Yeah, that's always been the challenge, right? The challenge is if you have some product being developed that needs to run in multiple, phones, and they really want to take the goal of getting very hardware-specific features working on each one,
right.
You really are you're going to be in trouble dealing with that multi-layer abstracted version of each of those things and figuring out how to make them work. Absolutely. Compared to having native direct. Yeah. Absolutely. But yeah, a lot of things we do is like, you might take a picture with a camera. I'm assuming those are easy things to do, right? Or find out your current GPS location.
Well, actually, taking a picture with a camera, one of the ways of taking a picture with a camera is exactly why you would need to write platform-specific code. For example, if you want to take an image of a check and then parse that check, and retrieve the values and use them in your code, you'll need to create your own custom native code.
But you can do that in Flutter, no problem. It's just you'll do less of it.
To tell the truth, I don't know Flutter that well.
Right. Don't put you on the spot there.
Yeah.
But more curiosity of like, the areas that, you would focus on.
I know that sensor work is done in Flutter without doing any native platform-specific code.
Oh, that's cool.
Yeah, so they did that part, right?
So like rotation and things like that.
Yeah. I guess the important point is if this trajectory of adoption continues like we're seeing in the graph, there will be third-party components built to do those things like camera and GPS. Right. We won't have to be writing it ourselves.
Yeah, even better. Yeah.
Yeah.
Cool.
Having said that, both React Native and Flutter could be potentially the right decision, because there are a bunch of apps already written in both frameworks. Facebook, Instagram, Pinterest, Uber Eats, Walmart, Tesla is all React Native. Realtor, Square, eBay, Capital One, Groupon, Google, Sonos, BMW is all Flutter. So yeah, we'll see adoption of these frameworks grow in next few years.
So I have a question, I think, around that, and maybe a point you made earlier. If I'm starting a new project completely, and I have a team of JavaScript savvy, TypeScript savvy developers that are, React oriented, is that a reason to consider React Native versus others, or is that kind of like a false proposition?
So I can tell up front that I'm very biased toward native development. Having said that, if you have people that are very good with JavaScript and they're very familiar with developing in JavaScript, then maybe React Native is your better choice. But I go through it throughout this article. I go through exactly that decision. It also depends on your project. So if the app is fairly simple, you'll be fine. If the app is going to be complicated with a lot of features or a lot of upgrades in the future, you might find yourself hiring more JavaScript developers than you would if you hired two teams of platform-specific developers. So it all depends on your needs.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. I believe in the native approach as well. So I was kind of throwing a softball there because I agree with you. So, but we do talk to companies that are exactly in that situation. Hey, we're starting something new, and we already have a team of React developers and a React web app developed. How can we reuse some of that code or knowledge? Is what we encounter quite frequently.
What I can tell you from what I found is that Dart is very simple. I mean, any JavaScript developer will pick up Dart and become a professional in 2 to 3 days. So learning curve is not a problem. The learning curve becomes a problem when if you decide to teach JavaScript developers native development, then it might be a problem. But Dart versus JavaScript, they're very, very similar.
Okay, that makes some sense. What are some of the things you feel that Flutter needs to work on or doesn't do as well that you feel like areas for improvement you think long-term that you see?
I don't know that well to comment on this. From what I've seen so far, they're on the right track.
Okay, that's good.
Yeah.
Yeah,
sorry.
What's the resources for getting started in Flutter? What would you hit? Is there a good tutorial site, or do they have good docs on their own?
So Flutter, in that respect, Flutter is a lot more mature than React Native. Although React Native has been there for a while, Flutter is a lot more documented, a lot better documented. So just go Google Flutter. I think I have a couple of.
I have the site here. Let me see.
Maybe I don't. But yeah, everything that you need to know is on Flutter's documentation website.
Yeah, like they have a gallery in here and
Flutter.dev.
Tons of stuff.
Early last year, I started a course on Flutter on Udemy. A very comprehensive course. I only did 25% of it and then got busy with other things again. But it was really good for as far as I got through it. It was very detailed.
Oh yeah, Udemy is a good resource. I took 2 courses there, but the best resource that I found for myself is YouTube. There's information on YouTube. You can basically learn anything you want.
Okay, that's good to know.
Flutter.dev site provides you with practically anything you want, and you'll be able to bring up your own development environment and run your first app within minutes.
So is the setup for it similar, I guess, in terms of prereqs? You're going to have your native platform ready to go. I assume you have to install Dart before you install Flutter, or part of it installs Dart, something along those lines.
As far as I remember, it installs everything at once and then install
That's
and
nice.
put a plugin.
Right. I see a cookbook here has a lot of good basic things that you would need to do. On it too. All right, cool. So yeah, check out.
I had to install, I recall, but it's been a while since I've looked at it.
You did install the Android SDK? Yeah.
Yeah, that and
I would think so. Yeah. And does this run on iOS as well? I'm assuming it does. That's the whole point, right?
Yes, it does.
Okay.
And you will need the Xcode, and you'll need you'll need MacBook.
Yeah. The interesting thing with Flutter basically being responsible for its own rendering completely, like it handles everything, is that you could theoretically build an app on Android that looks exactly like an iOS app.
Well, you can do that in React Native as well. It's just
okay.
Right. It's just theming.
It's like a full screen app that has this styled widgets that look like it. Yeah.
Yeah. The key is not to have Android app look exactly like
right. Good point.
What do you mean? No, I'm just kidding. Oh man. All right. Yeah, this is very cool. And as we have you, like, as you're doing your blog posts, we'll bring them up in the dev news and point out the samples you're building. So that'll be good to see.
Sounds good.
All right, great. Well, thanks a lot. I really appreciate you coming on and talking about Flutter.
Sure.
And I think that'll do it. So again, quick things to remember, PhillyEmergingTech.com. We are registering right now for people to sign up. Early bird tickets, thank you, Becca, are $70. It's PhillyEmergingTech.com. And that's going to be in May, and you'll see the information on the website. And hit us up on YouTube, Chariot Solutions on YouTube, YouTube/Chariot Solutions for our playlist for all of our shows, including this one. And our website has a blog and other stuff there as well. So thank you very much for joining for the week. And hey, any feedback, please send it either to the email techcastfeedback@chariotsolutions.com or tweet us at techcast. And let us know if you like the show, or if you really enjoyed me scrolling around trying to find the GitHub link this morning. It's one of those things. I start off slow sometimes in these weeks. But otherwise, I will see everybody next week. So have a good one.
Take care. Thank you.